are things starting to stabilize and recover over there now?
Oh, thank heavens. I mean, it's the usual mugginess that one would expect to experience in a British summertime. That's about what we've got at the moment. I think the last time I checked the temperature today, it was in the early 20s, so that's much more bearable. To give you some sense of context, what the London Fire Brigade have experienced over the last couple of days, when we were experiencing temperatures in the late 30s and even the early 40s in the UK, which is just unprecedented, never heard of that before. The fire brigade said that they had their busiest day, get this, since World War II. So that is how bad the situation actually became, because obviously the heat meant there were so many fires all over the place. The emergency services just couldn't cope.
Well, and yeah, and people have to bear in mind, I mean, temperatures that might be okay in one area can be a crisis somewhere else. I mean, you're used to moderate temperatures. It's just like in Texas, their world comes to a halt if they get an inch of snow, but 40-degree weather and they don't bat an eye. And likewise, in cooler or more moderate climates, when you get a heat wave like that, we're just not ready to cope with it.
But I think that's the thing, exactly the same way that over in Canada, I know that you guys are fantastic when it comes to dealing with, say, a lot of snow. Whereas over here, okay, we can deal with a bit of it, but not too much. But it seems to be extremes of any weather we can't cope with here. And the main reason for that is because extremes on all fronts, whether it's extreme heat, extreme snow, extreme rain, whatever it is such a rarity that we don't have the equipment standing by to deal with this kind of extreme weather. So take, for example, the extreme heat recently. I know a lot of buildings across the pond and in certain parts of the Middle East would, as standard, have air conditioning fitted within that building to deal with this kind of weather. Whereas here, air conditioning is just something for people of a luxury, that it's not really standard in most buildings here. Certainly houses don't really have air conditioning. Okay, most modern office buildings do, but certainly not old ones. And it's because we just don't need it normally.
Yeah, and it's similar here. A lot of us can just get by. We'll get a few hot days a year where you'll open the windows and turn on the fans, but we can get by without air conditioning. But you get those protracted heat waves, and for, I guess, vulnerable people like seniors and people with respiratory issues, it can be very dangerous to be exposed to heat for such long periods. Has there been somewhere where people could retreat to, at least when it was that hot, or somewhere to get out of the house, things like that?
Not really. This is the problem. And especially, so that was actually one of the warnings that came with this extreme weather, is that we were being told by professionals and by our leaders and things like that, that they wanted to make sure that those who are older, those who maybe do have respiratory issues, making sure that they were protecting themselves and made sure that they took the proper precautions. So making sure they had plenty of air circulating. If they had any fans they could access, then that'd be great. Also make sure that they maybe drank plenty of water all the time. All of the standard advice that you would expect to receive in extreme conditions. I think, though, Corey, my favorite bit of advice, though, that we received over the past few days from the officials, and I don't think I would have thought of this without the guidance of the powers that be, is they said, under no circumstances should anyone be tempted to wear, quote unquote, a woolly hat. Thanks. I don't think I would have thought of that myself.
Well,
Thank you
I'm
very
glad
much.
they offered that advice to everybody.
Oh,
Yeah, we have those over here too.
honestly.
With the fires, I mean, one of our commenters, Bridget Frostad, saying, and like, what did spark the fires, though? I mean, the heat can exacerbate it, but why were so many fires lit? Like, what had happened to cause them in the first place?
It's a great question. I don't think we know all the answers, to be honest. I think some of the worst damage we saw was actually in the East End of London, where there was a cluster of houses. The buildings over here, typical houses are terrace houses, so all in a row, all joined to each other. And there was, I think, a chain of about 5 houses in the East End of London that caught ablaze. And although it's not completely clear what it is, it could have been a patch of dry grass that maybe spread to the building. It could have even been a cigarette butt from someone sort of just not extinguishing it properly. And of course, in the heat, it caught fire. But I've heard horror stories of people leaving items on windowsills that they don't think will actually magnify or intensify the heat. Silly things like, for example, those snow globe things. So I've heard like sort of stories of some people leaving a snow globe on the windowsill, not actually appreciating how the sun can magnify through a glass sphere like that, and that catching a light. So it's all stuff like that. It's just that we've never experienced before. So causes are still, I think, being decided in a lot of the cases where, sadly, people's homes did catch fire. But as a result of it now, I think the most important thing to remember or to note at this stage is we haven't heard of any loss of life, thank goodness. And that's the most important thing. Now, that may be just because those statistics haven't come out yet, but most importantly is that it would appear as though that we haven't experienced that so far.
So how about with your power grid and your load? Because I do know that, like, it takes a heck of a lot more energy actually to cool down an environment than to heat it. And in areas with heat waves, quite often you can suddenly get blackouts and brownouts. That kind of happens in Canada occasionally too. With the people who do have air conditioning, they blast it up full blast, and it overwhelms the grid sometimes. Did it hold out there?
As far as I know, yes, it did, which is terrific. I don't actually think that was too much of a problem because, to tell you the truth, with the rising cost of energy over here, I don't know what it's like over in Canada, but with the rising cost of energy over here, I strongly suspect that people were too afraid to, and I'm genuinely serious when I say too afraid, to use their electricity, because the problem is that energy bills are they're just flat out extortion now, so horrendously expensive over here that a lot of people are actually choosing not to even bother really using that much electricity. So I wouldn't be surprised if that swayed an awful lot of people's decision on how they were going to keep cool in the heat. And I strongly suspect that they probably just didn't even bother, half people turning on the fans and stuff like that.
Yeah, our power is not a heck of a lot cheaper over here, if at all, as well. So it makes people reconsider some of their decisions. But sometimes, as I said, if you're vulnerable, you're a senior, something like that, you might not have a choice.
Sure.
A safety
yeah,
issue.
Sure. No. I very much hope that people made the sensible decision and thought to themselves, well, look, even if you do spend a bit more money on 1 or 2 days of extreme heat, make up for it elsewhere. And hopefully that's exactly what they did. And I hope very much that people who were in that position did stay safe. But as I say, I mean, it's all about sort of waiting for these statistics to come out over the coming days. As it stands, we're talking about the start of this week, Monday and Tuesday of this very week that we're talking about. And so at the end of the week, it's still a bit early days to know for sure all of the statistics involved with the heat. But what we do know is that the UK actually broke its own record and topped the 40 degrees Celsius mark, which we haven't done before.
Yeah. So, before I let you go, then, how's your forecast looking? It's cooled down a bit for the moment. Is it looking like it should stay stable for the next while?
Thank heavens. It looks like we're going back to good old Blighty again, and we can expect some rain in the coming days. So we'll be much happier, I'm sure.
Okay, well, I appreciate you coming in to check in with us, and just get a direct account of how it's going over there. And like I said, we're in some of a moderate climate here too, so we can relate when heat knocks us down more than it does with others, and that it can become a pretty dangerous situation. So I'm glad it sounds like there's been no casualties so far, and hopefully more policies and infrastructure come into place so you're not so vulnerable for future heat waves.
Absolutely. Well, here is hoping. And I think that sort of one thing that we are all aware of is that these freak occurrences may happen a little more often. As to what the cause of that is, that's a great subject of discussion over here. A lot of people obviously attributing it towards climate change. A lot of people just saying, hey, it's just the summertime, chill out, what's the problem? So that in itself is causing great debate. But let's just say that I think that whatever the reason behind it is, I think we can all agree that we need to be better prepared for certainly extreme heat. But as I said, unfortunately, preparations for extreme weather of any sorts in the UK has never necessarily been our strong point.
Oh, and as you said, yeah, the discussion as to the causes is a heated one, and it is over here for those things too. And I can see it in my comment scroll, but that's a whole other show that we could fill a heck of a lot more time on. So
anytime.
Great. I appreciate the update. And yeah, maybe perhaps we could check in with you again down the road on UK issues, because it's always good to get direct information from somebody out there on the ground.
It would be a great pleasure, sir.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And I will talk to you again sometime.
Thank you, Corey.